Coaching in Session.
Your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
Welcome, Nella Dwyer, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me, Michael. Appreciate it.
Of course, today we're going to be talking about your work, ADHD executive coach, and this is going to be definitely one for the busybodies of the world, because when it comes to executive coaching, it's definitely breaking plateaus, reaching new levels, and sometimes we can get in our own way, maybe because of just our habits, our disciplines, or maybe just where our mind is going. So we're going to be diving into your work in just a moment. But before we do that, could you tell us who you are, what you do, and how you help?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Nella. I'm an executive coach for people with ADHD. So I'm an ADHD coach and a neurodiversity consultant. And I'm also a singer-songwriter. So a lot of us ADHDers are quite creative. So that might come as no surprise. There's a lot of us that are entrepreneurs as well. So how do I help people? Most people that come to me are either entrepreneurs, creative professionals, executives, CEOs that have ADHD, but they want to understand how their brain works. And they also sort of they know they can get to their goals, but they want to get there without the overwhelm, without the burnout, without the using different working modalities that are not working for them. So they want to learn how to use systems that work for them. So for me, it's a very different brain. It's not a bad brain. It's got different good and bad than the neurotypical brain. Just like the neurotypical brain has good and bad. So it's fascinating, yeah. And I love what I do. And I've met some incredible brains from around the world with ADHD who are very successful. So there's a lot of misconceptions. So we can dive into that later. Makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. The misconceptions are something we're going to be looking at. But before we go too far, how would a person know if they're dealing with a brain that is experiencing ADHD symptoms?
How long is a piece of string, Michael? Because it's, I suppose I always say to people, well, my training was a year long, 10,000 pages on how the ADHD brain works. So I suppose if somebody was to ask you, how does a neurotypical brain, what are the symptoms? It's a very long conversation. But there are some kind of classic, there is a kind of classic blueprint that a lot of us or most of us sort of have, and I guess, for every sort of trait or symptom of ADHD on one side, it can be a negative, and the other side, it's actually a huge strength. So I'm very strengths-based, and that's not to glamorize ADHD. That's just the facts, and that's the science we're dealing with now that we know that it's just a very different brain. So what traits or symptoms of ADHD can there be? All depends. But again, that blueprint I talked about, we would usually be quite sensitive. So rejection sensitive. So any received or perceived rejection that might come at us, we may sort of perceive it as a physical pain in our chest, and we may impulsively give back the same amount of hurt that the person may have unknowingly, unwittingly, or unintentionally given us. The other side of that, I suppose that's why we're very great that's why I'm a songwriter. If I wasn't so sensitive, which, yes, that's caused me a lot of pain in my life. But at the same time, just like I said, with the kind of strengths with every trait or symptom that presents with, sensitivity to being very empathic. I'm a songwriter. I wouldn't be able to write songs if I wasn't so sensitive, right? So I wouldn't give it back. So a lot of people I work with would be very empathic, would be kind of emotional sponges, pick up other people's energy. Very strong intuition, but we need people like that, too. Yeah, so we would be quite sensory. So our sensory environment is very important to us. Being creative. The H in ADHD is hyperactivity. A lot of people think that means physically hyperactive, whereas in little boys it can be. It can look like that, but the hyperactivity is really of the brain. So we get lots of thoughts at the exact same time. So we're great idea generators. That's why a lot of entrepreneurs, if you're 600% more likely to be an entrepreneur if you have ADHD, because we are natural born idea generators. Now that could be very overwhelming at the same time. Again, like the other side of the scale I mentioned about the strengths and the symptoms and traits, there's a negative and positive for everyone, just like a neurotypical brain. So, great idea generators, however, can get very overwhelmed because we can get lots of thoughts at the same time, and we may not be able to execute them all to fruition without adopting totally different working modalities. And that's sort of how I help people. time blindness. We don't measure things in actual time, so we can often be late. We measure things in sort of anchors or dopamine or energy. So, if you have something on at 1 o'clock, often we can end up being in waiting mode all day until that time if we haven't sort of, instilled a kind of a morning routine that really works for us, which again, just requires a totally different approach to how we've always been taught. I could go on and on. There's so many different traits and symptoms of those of us with ADHD. But yeah, so I could just keep talking, interrupt me.
Yeah, no, I don't interrupt guests. It's one of my things, and it's a pet peeve of mine when people interrupt me. So I don't interrupt guests because I don't like being interrupted myself. I'll let a guest talk 30 minutes. This is your episode. But today we want to learn about you. We want to learn about your work. So you are in the spotlight in a sense. So we are just learning from you. You are the teacher, we are the students. And one of the things I want to look at is when we look at someone with ADHD, sometimes they can maybe get pulled in with someone with ADD, and now you have a whole array of stigmas on a person. I can't tell you how many children growing up, they're labeled with either ADD, ADHD, and it feels as if they are broken, right? There's something wrong with them, but that they're not good enough, that they can't be like everyone else. They're not a regular kid. And of course, like if that mindset continues, it's going to be something that they deal with later on in life too, as an adult, maybe saying, you know what, like I truly can't be myself. I have to maybe put on a cover, and I have to, try to blend in and fit in. And, I want to talk to you about the benefits of embracing, who you are as a person, whether the good, the bad, or the ugly.
Yeah. So I suppose, you touched on a few different things. I'll try and work backwards. So, yeah, again, in true ADHD style, my brain is wanting to answer 4 or 5 things you said at the exact same time. So I got to choose one. So, okay, the stigma. So yeah, I think we're getting better at understanding that it's not a negative. We're not there yet. But I suppose the one thing about labels with ADHD, it is actually a really helpful label, because if you can understand that somebody has ADHD, their brain works very differently. It's not that they need to have accommodations. It's that you need to be maybe educated on how that person processes information, how that person, how you can actually draw the strengths from that person out, rather than how do we accommodate them so they show up like everybody else. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing the class, if it's a classroom or whatever, or a team, or, a workplace, you're doing everybody a disservice, because somebody with ADHD, is going to be the problem solver. They're going to be the person who has the great creative ideas. They're going to be the people that spot things that other people don't. We're highly sensitive. Again, there can be good and bad to that. But again, it's anyway. The other thing about ADD is ADD was actually, that term was actually gotten rid of in 1987 or 88, I believe. ADHD is actually the term, the blanket term. People say, oh, well, I don't have the hyperactivity. Well, actually, most of us do, because it's hyperactivity of the brain. It's not outward. So that's quite misunderstood. So ADHD is actually the term to describe everybody with ADHD. There are kind of different types. Most people fall into the combined, but there are people who would present because of, we're all different humans. We've had different upbringings, different environments. And I think people are going to present stronger or not in the sort of hyperactivity or whatever. I don't really differentiate, to be honest, because there's no real need to, because I feel like you can leave some stuff on the table that might need to be sort of addressed, or at least put names on. Like I say, if I'm working with somebody, if they don't think that they have this type of ADHD, they may not realize that actually that piece, if you actually understood it about yourself, it's not just a trait of yours, it's a characteristic of ADHD. And here's all the different working modalities you can use to navigate your life and be in the driver's seat of your own brain. Anyway, I digress in true ADHD style. So what else did you say? So the stigma, yeah, I think, the reality, the facts of ADHD are that, if you really look at all the entrepreneurs in the world and the inventors and the creators, majority of them are neurodivergent. So how could that be a bad thing, right? So it's, ADHD, I'm not trying to, again, glamorize it. It is very difficult if we don't understand it. If we're in an environment where other people don't understand it. So my job, I work with some multinational companies. I do trainings with them, helping them to, to kind of adopt a new ecosystem, embracing neurodiversity, not to give the people who are neurodivergent accommodations only. It's actually to educate everybody on what it really is. So I did a talk last week I'm in Ireland right now. I live between Ireland and Los Angeles. And I did a talk in Belfast in Northern Ireland last week. And I was talking to 150 people who are all entrepreneurs, women in business. Actually, it was a female event. And I was trying to, come up with it. It was a 20-minute talk. And I was trying to see how I could best serve them. And for the 2 days leading up to it, people were saying, "Oh, do you suffer with ADHD?" And I wasn't offended at all. My response was, and it gave me a lot of information. My response was, I don't suffer with ADHD. I have ADHD. But I now understand my brain and how to navigate life. And actually my life is really good. And I realize a lot of the characteristics of ADHD have been the reason for my perseverance, for my resilience. I had my baby when I was 15 years old. I sing in the biggest video game in the world. I tour the world all the time. I work with some of the most well-known names in the world with ADHD. And, I've had a lot of success in my life. And that's not to show off. It's just all of that with ADHD. So going back to the talk, what I did was I just said, you know what? I'm just going to throw away all my slides and just say what ADHD is and what it is not. Because, Michael, what I'm trying to say is that I'm getting there. What I'm trying to say is that it's very misunderstood. And a lot of, people will suffer if they're in an environment where, number one, they haven't got the label, because the label gives us information. And number two, where other people don't understand it. So I think that's sort of where the suffering comes in, because you mentioned people putting kind of a cover on themselves. And you're absolutely right. People with ADHD, naturally, we mask. So we often don't really know how other people would describe us, because we're often showing up to different people with a different mask on, because we often don't really understand, how to show up. So we show up as we think that the other person might want us to show up. And that kind of plays into characteristic of ADHD, or a symptom of ADHD, which would be people pleasing. But we can use that to our advantage too, because, if you are not going for a walk every day, but you've told Mary that you're going to meet her at 11 o'clock every morning for the walk. Now you've got body doubling, accountability, and your people pleasing is working for you, right? So you've set up a system. So that's just a micro system kind of example of how when you understand how your brain works, you've got goals, but it just, again, requires a totally different approach. So if you're meeting Mary, now your people pleasing is working for you. Do you understand what I mean? So it's not a bad thing, but when you don't know how to navigate it because you don't understand what you're dealing with, and you were never given the manual for how your brain works, how are you supposed to navigate life effectively, right? Now, most people do, because we often will just work, hyper-focus, because ADHD is a deficit of interest and a strength of hyper-focus. So if we're interested in something, we can hyper-focus on it a lot more than, the general population, I suppose. So that's why you often see people with ADHD that are, if they have the right systems and support systems around them, they will get to the top of their game in whatever they are interested in. However, the parts they're not interested in, that's what they need to delegate. That's what they need to delete or delegate, So again, I could just talk for hours on it. But so it is a deficit of interest. So if we, with ADHD, we usually do have the intention to get something done, but if we don't have the interest piece, then it's very difficult to have the attention to get the ignition to actually start and execute something that we're not interested in. And usually it's not about how to find it more interesting. It's what's blocking my interest, right? So sometimes that can be, I just don't have enough information. Okay, who can you ask? Who do you need to get that information to make that, to take that first step? So, we can have a lot of blocks because we go from 0 to 100 and we forget the kind of the steps that need to happen in front of us. But we can delegate that once we understand the system we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked one of the parts you said about how you identify where a person is strong, where a teacher should know from their training and education and just an extreme awareness into their classroom and into the students, how this child learns. Are they an auditory learner? Are they visual? Are they kinesthetic? Are they hands-on? And we need to figure out what type of learner they are so we can be effective educators. But when it comes to, a person just kind of being thrown in environments where people are not looking at them and then looking at their, where they're strong and where they're weak, I mean, there's a possibility that they can be put in situations where they're not showing off their full strengths. And if you are in an environment long enough where you're not being promoted in a sense for, hey, this is what you're really good at. Like, you should do this. Like, you're speaking, you're singing, you're really good at it. So you should do it. And that's more beneficial to the mind, because it's like, That is who I am. Now we're creating our identity rather than the negative side of, oh, I'm not good at this, like everyone else is good at this. It's like test taking. You might get F's on tests. I'm not good at taking tests, but if we have to have an intellectual conversation, I could probably hold my own. It's not going to be a problem. And so everyone is going to be operating in different mind. And in the society in general, we are very quick to put everyone in a cookie cutter type of program. If you're not this, then something is wrong with you. If you're not doing this, you're misbehaving. And if you're not making this much money by this age, something is wrong. And all of these anchors in life can truly, mess with someone's morale or self-esteem, even where they might not try to dare, they might just say, I'm not going to put myself out there because everyone's going to attack me if I put myself out there. And you might have a brilliant idea, like entrepreneurs. I can't tell you how many I know. They have all of these ideas, whether they be inventions, business ideas, and they're just so afraid to start or begin. And so, one of the things I would love or maybe like for this conversation to start to lead to is, how do you help these entrepreneurs? How do you help these executive, people, whether it be mindsets or figures in their own right, maybe CEOs or COOs or wherever they are currently, expand their mind, expand their reach, and to go after their dreams and stop holding back?
Mm. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think, yeah, you're right. It's like that whole Einstein thing. If you judge, what is it? If you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, then it'll forever think it's stupid. So I think, from the classroom to being an adult, I suppose from a child perspective, and I work with adults, but I mean, I have a child. Well, she's 22 now. She's a grown up child with ADHD, driving to university. So, but I suppose if again, I'm trying to answer you about four things at the same time. So I'll tell you the first thought I had when you were talking, and that was that ADHDers hate rules. Okay, so this applies to children, adults. We hate rules. However, if we were asked to come up with the rules with somebody, or for our ideas of what the rules or the systems should be, usually our brains are very good at that. So now we feel part of it. So basically, if somebody with ADHD is told to do something, like if I told my clients, oh, do this, do this, do this, they wouldn't do it. I never do that. They wouldn't do it, right? I wouldn't do it. We hate rules because usually our brain has come up with a far more effective way to do that thing. But if you come up with the rules together, or if it was a child, ask the child to come up with the rules with you, or if it's in a team, ask your team, or what way do you want this to be? Then ADHDers will be the biggest kind of promoter of the rules, right? So we're very loyal, but if we think that there's a better way to do something, we're not going to listen to you, because authenticity is also very important to us. So I suppose when you're asking me then about, so how do I work with people and how do I get them to kind of execute their goals? How long is a piece of string? But I suppose, when I meet people, I'll always do kind of a free call with them first, see why they booked the call. And usually they'll tell me their story and why they think either they might have ADHD or they do, and how it's affected them in positive and negative ways. And so how I work with people, I'll start working with them for 3 months minimum. Usually people stay on for at least a year. They don't have to though. And I'll basically build what I call a personal operationals manual for how they actually work. So that includes sort of, looking backwards, because you mentioned another thing I want to mention. So you mentioned that you often may not feel that you've confidence. If you've been hearing a lot of negative stuff, you may not have confidence to kind of think that you can, execute your goals and do whatever you want. And that's true. A lot of, they say there's most people by the age of, I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's something like by the age of 7, most people with ADHD have heard about 20,000 negative comments towards them because we don't show up, typical. And I suppose, my job when I'm working with people is usually people with ADHD, if they've went sort of undiagnosed or I don't want to say treated, but, they've went without fully understanding their brain or working with somebody to educate them on the ways it actually works for their brain, then usually their confidence in themselves and their trust in themselves, just like mine was before I got diagnosed 9 years ago, 9 years ago maybe at this point. And I worked with an ADHD coach. It changed my life. And I was like, okay, I'd only ever done my music and I was doing really well at that. And I said, okay, I can't gatekeep this. I have to tell the world about this because this has changed my life very quickly. And that's why I trained to be an ADHD coach. So, I'll get back to how I work with people. So my job is to kind of get people to learn who they actually are, because most people with ADHD, we're masking all our lives and we don't really know how we've gotten to the points we've gotten to because we're constantly chasing dopamine. So we're constantly chasing that next thing. And what that means is we're not looking back at what actually contributed to all the successes we've already had in our life. What strengths innately have contributed to that? And, most people wouldn't even say I've achieved anything great in my life because, again, ADHD is about the now or the not now. If it's not happening now, it's not happening. I tour China and with a big orchestra behind me and, I do a lot of great things, but, I've learned, I had to learn that actually just because it's not happening now doesn't mean I can't talk about that on social media or post about it. Because for me, that feels very inauthentic because I'm not doing it now. So it's not really happening. Whereas, no, that's part of my journey. That's part of my story. It actually factually happened. That's part of my story, and so most people with ADHD, I've never met somebody with ADHD that doesn't have a myriad of incredible successes in their past, whether they see them as successes or not. I was coaching one woman for about a year and a half until she told me, we were talking about getting a system set up so that she'd have her, consistent gym routines. She's like, yeah, I did win something in the Olympics, actually. I was like, what? It's mad. But that's my experience with everybody I work with, because we don't care about the past stuff because it's not happening now, right? So when I work with people, I really look at, okay, what are all the strengths, the unique strengths that contributed to all those successes that they had, and how can we use them to apply them to what they want to achieve? That's one part of it. Another part is just, hearing how their week went, how was the week? Tell me a highlight of the week. What do you want to focus on in this session? And once they start to verbally process, ADHDers, we need to verbally process to get what's in our head out so that we hear it back and we can actually process it. Really important for us. So, once they verbally process, it gives me a lot of information about what's going on, and I can notice, just like any coach, I suppose, I'm noticing what they're talking about. And then through the process of me coaching them on what happened that week or what their goal is or how they navigate it, I'm like, oh, well, that's called this, and that's an ADHD trait called whatever. There's so many object permanence or time blindness or whatever. And here's things that actually really work for that. And I'll tell them about something, and then, they'll go, wow, that's not, I always thought I was just broken, like the word you used, or that was just a negative flaw I had. And it's like, no, that's called this, and this is why it happens. So number one, they're getting validation for their experience. They're like, wow, okay, I'm not broken. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm like, yeah, and let me tell you a bit more about it. And also, this is a way that really works. This approach really works for this specific, situation. There's a very, very different, again, operating system. And I've worked with people for 2 years and we still don't get through everything that, I told you earlier, my manual for my training was 10,000 pages and we trained for 8 hours a week for a year. I'm still learning, there's still a lot of research. There's so much in the ADHD brain that we, there's sort of not anything that somebody can come to me with that I can't go, well, that's called this and this is what we can try. When people learn that, actually life can be a lot easier and there's nothing wrong with you, and it just makes somebody's confidence in themselves grow so much, their trust in themselves, even a little thing like somebody being really frustrated, that they keep losing stuff, or, honestly, that's not really, it's usually much bigger stuff than that we work with. But, I had a client and, had a lot of problems with his wife, and now they've saved their marriage, and it's great because now he understands his brain, he can explain it to her what's happening, and then they, apply it again, different systems. So he kept forgetting things. And when I explained to him, the reason that you're forgetting, for example, your keys when you get or when you're leaving the house, or you getting into the house and then you've left your keys and you're looking for it when you're leaving the house, is because, again, ADHDers are constantly chasing dopamine. So if you can imagine a neurotypical brain, these dopamine receptors take dopamine away at an even pace like this. And an ADHD brain, these dopamine robbers take it away much faster. So we want to stimulate the brain to slow them down. Very, very, simplistic way of explaining it. But dopamine is also the neurotransmitter that is responsible for creating memory. Okay. So how do we get dopamine? From interest or shock, good or bad. The ADHD brain does not differentiate. So somebody's coming in the door and they leave their keys down and they were not interested where they put the keys and their brain was somewhere else. then there was actually no dopamine available to them at that time. Therefore, no memory was created. So therefore, no memory was stored. So the memory they're looking for doesn't exist, right? So when you can kind of explain how, that's the reason why, it's not just because you're stupid or you're not listening to your wife or you don't care or whatever it might be. That's why. But these are the things that we can do, actually. These are an option of things. Which one makes sense? Which one do you think you could try? Etc. So there's, that's a very small example, but yeah. So I suppose I build kind of a personal operationals manual with them through their sort of weekly life experience, on how their brain works, what their values are from an ADHD perspective, what their core needs are. We often don't know what our actual needs are from day to day. There's a whole different Maslow's hierarchy of needs for people with ADHD, starting at your environment, etc. Sleep, very important. And your strengths, your character strengths. And that gives a person a lot of information about themselves. So therefore, their confidence in themselves goes way up. Their understanding of themselves, their understanding why certain relationships or scenarios are not suiting them, because actually it's just the values don't align. There's nothing wrong with that person or you. It's just the values don't align, and that's okay. And boundaries. Boundaries is a huge one. Most of us with ADHD have no built-in boundaries. Most people who are neurotypical naturally put boundaries in place with people, and that can be time boundaries, it can be sexual boundaries, it can be physical boundaries, it can be, there's, lots of different types of boundaries. So I do a lot of boundaries work with people as well. And that really can transform people's lives, from relationships to, even I worked with one guy who was a director of a company, and he was a co-founder of a company. And something you said a while ago, if you're being judged in a certain way, then how can you sort of thrive? But he was supposed to get a stake in his company, and he wasn't getting a stake in the company because his performance reviews were based off time, were based off communication style. And he was thinking he was putting in boundaries because everyone was pulling from him, wanting his time. But when I told him exactly, we spent a few weeks on what boundaries actually are and what boundaries he may need to implement, we realized that he really needs some time boundaries because he wasn't spending time with his wife, because he was overworking, because he was taking on everybody else's load. Long story short, well, it's not short, but long story kind of short. When we worked with that, and he put in, proper boundaries rather than very hard boundaries or telling people I'm putting in a boundary with you. That's not a boundary. Boundary is about controlling your own response to somebody once you've told them how their behavior affects you. Then the company understood, actually, and he was able to educate them as well. I sent him some stuff to show them. Then they basically changed what the performance review sort of segments were. They understood that actually they can't judge him on time management because he may show up late, but he's the one working an extra 40 hours a month, because everyone's pulling from him. So, saying that he's late and they're marking him down because he's half an hour late at work doesn't make any sense, because, it just worked differently for him, for example. Anyway, so basically, once we really worked with that and he started putting in really great boundaries with people, he had his own time blocked away from everybody else, and he sent out a blanket email, I'm available during this time only because I have to do my own work. People then stopped trying to reach him during that time. He got his own work done. He could help everybody else. He was able to kind of spend time with his wife because he was getting his own work done as well. And he got the stake in the company because they revised their how they were actually reviewing him in a performance review, when actually he was probably one of the most successful people in the company. He just approached things differently. So, when you kind of learn how to get the best out of people, from I suppose a company point of view, that can kind of be a game changer. So it's really, a lot of it's about education. I've went on about 15 tangents, but I hope somewhere in there I answered you.
We love tangents. We allow freedom of speech. Anything you want to say, it is okay here in Coaching in Session. It's about a conversation. It's not about answering my questions. And I have a very unique way, I guess, of asking questions. I give you 5 options typically. It's like 3 to 5 options, sometimes 2, sometimes just 1, depending on if I do want something very specific. And it's it's up to the guest to kind of lead the conversation. I'm just kind of the navigator. I just kind of move people here and there, kind of like Hapkido. But one of the final questions I want to ask you is going to be about tools. A tool is something we can use on day-to-day basis. Of course, we think of the physical tools, how we might fix our plumbing, or something's wrong with our car, we'll use tools. But in our life, we can equip ourselves with tools, whether it be skill-based tools, or it could be like physical things like yoga, going to the gym and doing cardio or Stairmaster or something along those lines. Maybe a tool could be journaling, like you enjoy journaling, or maybe it's meditation. And, just from, your years of working with people with ADHD, is there tools that would benefit them primarily? Like these are the best tools I have found that work well with the majority of people who are dealing with ADHD.
Like I was saying earlier, like the ADHD brain is just a different operating system. So it's sort of similar to me asking you to give me tools for the neurotypical brain. It's like, well, where the heck do we start? So um, a lot of people, don't realize how much there is in actually, in ADHD coaching, and it's not a great name because actually it's a lot more than just coaching. It's kind of mentoring, coaching, educating, the neuroscience, etc. But so I suppose one thing I could say, I suppose one small bit of value I could probably say would be that the two things I think there's no point in me going into lots of different tools because there's just, there's just too many. I suppose the one thing I would say that the two things that are the most important if you have ADHD, there's no medication, there is no nootropic, there is no tool, there is no quick fix or anything if you are not getting good sleep. Sleep is incredibly important. No ADHD medication will work optimally. Sometimes I've got clients who, where if they're taking ADHD medication, they're like, oh, it's not working anymore. I'm like, okay, well, let's have a look at your sleep schedule. Or if they come to me, they're very, very overwhelmed, and they think they want to focus on this, or this. And I'm like, well, your energy is very different today. So it's my job to pick up on their energy, and your energy is very different today. How did you sleep? And often it's about, like, I actually don't think I've ever had a client that one session wasn't focused on their sleep hygiene because it's incredibly important. The ADHD brain needs sleep. So that's one thing. I mean, there's so much more I could talk about that and your sleep hygiene and your kind of things that really work for ADHDers, brain dumping before bed to get all those thoughts out of your head so your brain isn't trying to use to hold on to all the different things to remember because of executive functioning and memory, short-term memory issues. But that's a whole, it's a long, long conversation. But I suppose sleep is incredibly important. And the other thing is exercise. So if somebody with ADHD has stuff that they're not interested in, then, well, number one, exercise is incredibly important for ADHDers as well, lifting weights, ideally. And so for 2 hours after exercise, the ADHD brain is working as if it's on ADHD stimulants. So what that means is that the dopamine is really available to you, for want of a better words. So if you've got some body of work that you're not interested in, schedule it. Well, number one, schedule exercise. Number two, schedule it in the 2 hours after exercise, because it's going to be a lot easier for your executive functioning is going to be working a lot better, So I think they might sound small, but they are two incredibly important things foundationally, I suppose, with ADHD that need to be really prioritized.
Perfect. And that was exactly what I was looking for. So don't feel as if it was a cop out because tools can be anything, right? It could just be a bit of advice also. Like this is what I find works really well. And I love sleep. I have 2 kids and they're very young. And if I can get a nap, I would definitely take it. They don't want to take naps. I don't know why, but I remember being a kid and I was like, naps are for babies. And now, I prioritize my sleep because it's so powerful. It's
Yeah.
so powerful because when our brain is like on it, it's like, hey, I'm well rested, you can do so much more. And if you're just tired, it takes me 2 to 3 times longer just to do something because it's like, wait, did I do it right? And I have to look at it again. Versus if I have a fresh mind and I'm coming in, I get the work done flat. So like there's so many books on like how you can leverage your schedule, like when is the best time for you to operate. Some people it's the morning. Some people it's not the morning. Maybe it's in the afternoon. Salespeople, they don't like doing calls in the morning. So in the morning, they're drinking their coffee, talking to people, and then they start their calls around noontime, because that's when people are going to answer. Because in the morning they're busy, whatever it is. And then afternoon, everyone's, maybe inebriated from their lunch or whatever. And they're just like, whatever, I'm trying to find something. And a phone call, hey, sure, that will distract me from my work. Best time for sales calls, either way. So people have to figure out when is the best time for them. And like if you are struggling with when is the best time, or is any time good for you, as you said, it's more than just a coach, it's a mentor. It's someone to help you navigate, what works for you. It's not so much of, well, this worked for a client down the road, but you are a different person. And I am not a fan of cookie cutter approaches. I love individualized programs and products, because each person is so individualized. And I mean, just a classroom of 30 students, let alone a business of 500 employees, you can imagine how many different personalities, how many different minds, and you have to be able to identify who that person is. And the best I have found is to look at a person's life, not just to, know, but to truly understand, and to say, okay, this is where we're going, right? Where would you like to go? Let's create the values. Let's create the systems, if you want to go that far. And, this is all a roundabout way to say that we need support. We need guidance. We can't be afraid to ask for help when we need some support. If you have been led astray, maybe from society or your friends or parents or naysayers, and they have been giving you nothing but negative thoughts and have not been building on your strengths and have been antagonizing your weaknesses, it is time for a change. It is time for you to dive into something for an understanding, a consultation, a call, and to figure out, where you are today. So as we begin to wrap up, Nella, I would love to get some final words from you, and then for you to tell everyone where they can find you and reach out to you.
Yeah, sure. Yes, well, I suppose if anybody is sort of listening and realizes, okay, maybe I do have ADHD, or they know they have ADHD, that just to know that it's not a bad brain, it's just a very different brain. Again, some of the most successful people in the world have ADHD, and I would not give my ADHD back. Yeah, it's just a different operating system. Yeah, it's a real gift when you sort of really understand it. Anyway, so yeah, where can people find me? So I have a new website. I never had a website in all these years. But anyway, I have a new one, so I should tell you about it. So that's www.adhdlifemastery.org. Then on Instagram, I'm at ADH Diversity. So it's like ADHD diversity. So ADH Diversity. And then if you can't find that, it's Nella. I am Nella on Instagram. That's my music one. And I am Nella.com. And then if you want to just reach out and pop me an email, ADHDcoachnella@gmail.com. And yeah, so I suppose if anybody wants to work with me, I have a free 1-hour webinar on my website if people want that. I have a kind of a short mini course if people want that. If they want to work with me one-to-one, we can have a call. I take on just a short amount or a small amount of clients a year. And then I have a larger course that's coming up soon. So yeah.
That is perfectly fine. And I'll make it easy for everyone. They're not going to have any trouble finding any of your links and stuff, because they're right down below. It's a click of a button. It's the easiest thing a person can do to begin the journey. It's just a click away. And
Exactly.
I encourage people that if you are dealing with some type of symptoms of ADHD, or if you maybe know you have ADHD from long-standing diagnosis, and maybe you feel it's inhibiting your growth, or you feel as if you are capped, you're not, right? And as you said, Nella, it's not a bad brain, it's a different brain. So, to step into that difference, to step into the potential and the progress that is all capable with the right direction. So, Nella, I do want to thank you so much for coming on, spending some time, and of course, talking about your work today.
Cheers. Appreciate it, Michael. Thank you. Thanks for having me.